are watching the world 24/7 on the NDTV network. I am Parmeshwar Bawa, an action-packed bulletin lined up for you. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. US President Donald Trump has announced that Israel has agreed to an updated proposal for a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza that would secure the release of some hostages. Prime Minister Modi is embarking on a 5-nation visit to Ghana, Trinidad, Argentina, Brazil and Namibia. In the first leg of his visit, our Prime Minister will visit Ghana, which will be the first tour by an Indian Prime Minister in the last 3 decades. The US Senate has narrowly passed Donald Trump's sweeping tax and spending bill, handing the president a win ahead of his July 4th deadline. The US president has also reaffirmed that India-US will soon strike a trade deal with much less tariffs, allowing both countries to compete. Trump says it's going to be a different kind of deal. Spain and England have recorded their hottest June ever as scorching temperatures continue to grip Europe. The feud between Donald Trump and his former advisor Elon Musk has reignited over Trump's mega bill that the Senate passed. The billionaire tech mogul renewed criticism of the massive fiscal package, saying he would start a new political party if it passes. Meanwhile, US senators have killed a proposed ban on states' abilities to regulate artificial intelligence in a setback for Silicon Valley. A big focus, US President Donald Trump has announced that Israel has agreed to an updated proposal for a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza that would secure the release of some hostages. He in fact urged Hamas to accept the deal, warning on Truth Social that it will not get better, it will only get worse. This final proposal will be delivered by Qatar and Egypt, who have been working hard to broker peace, but I'll tell you why it matters. Fresh off brokering a ceasefire between Israel and Iran after 12 days of war, Trump is now pressing for a breakthrough in Gaza, where the war has dragged on for more than a year and a half. There's no indication yet that Hamas is prepared to accept the terms of this deal, but it also remains unclear whether the latest proposal addresses the core sticking points in the talks, which is Hamas's demand for a firm US commitment that a 60-day ceasefire will actually lead to a permanent end to this current war. In previous rounds, if you remember correctly, proposals were coordinated in advance by the United States, Qatar and Israel, but ultimately fell short of Hamas's expectations. So the world is watching closely, hoping the ceasefire can bring much-needed peace and a pause to the violence. We have a reaction from Netanyahu ahead of his Washington trip. Listen in.
אני צפוי לצאת בשבוע הבא לפגישות בארצות הברית עם נשיא ארצות הברית דונלד טראמפ, עם סגן הנשיא ואנס, עם מזכיר המדינה והיועץ לביטחון לאומי מרקו רוביו, עם שר ההגנה פיט הקסט, עם נציג הנשיא למזרח התיכון סטיב ויטקוף, עם שר המסחר. יש לנו כמה דברים, כן, לוטניק, אבל יש לנו כמה דברים לסגור לפני כן כדי להגיע להסכם הסחר בנוסף לדברים אחרים. פגישות עם ראשי הקונגרס והסנאט ופגישות ביטחוניות שאני לא אפרט כאן.
For an expert's view on the matter, let's go across to Arab and Middle East expert James Bowden, who joins us on NDTV. James, always a pleasure to have you on our show. Donald Trump has just announced that Israel has accepted a 60-day ceasefire deal, but Hamas has not said anything on record. What's your current assessment of this deal's viability, and does it actually address the fundamental demands on both sides?
Well, I think that you summarized it earlier really well. We have a very much Groundhog's movie type of situation. We've been here before with just minor variations on a theme. And
Absolutely.
we've watched as these prior ceasefire deals die a slow, agonizing death through the process of 1,000 different changes. So I remain very hesitant to believe that we are going to have an actual breakthrough right now. This is one of those kind of things where I just like to hold off until it actually happens because
Absolutely
it's so fragile.
Well, James, then how significant is the fact that this proposal originated in Qatar and was accepted by Israel only after White House meetings? Does it reflect a shift in regional power dynamics or simply a momentary alignment of interests?
I think it's more of the alignment of interest. Qatar and Egypt have been handling these negotiations from the very beginning, and yet we've actually seen elements in Qatar and in Egypt interfere. And so having the two parties continue to be a part of these negotiations actually makes me a little worried. And I think that we should be seeking new potential partners, maybe like the United Arab Emirates or maybe even the Saudis, because Egyptian intelligence actually undermined one of the prior ceasefire negotiations, I believe, last year. So I think that there needs to be a shift in who we are going to, and I think that the Emiratis have a much better track record of being aligned closer to United States priorities.
Yes. In fact, Israeli officials have threatened to turn Gaza city and central camps to dust if these negotiations stall. So whether such rhetoric actually impacts the potential for diplomatic progress, that remains to be seen. But James, as always, thank you so much for making time for us and joining us on NDTV. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has said a major trade deal with India could be close, potentially slashing tariffs and opening doors for American companies. Speaking on board the Air Force One, Trump said India may finally lower barriers for US businesses, a move that could help avoid a sharp 27% tariff hike set for the 9th of July in another 7 days. India's Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar, now in the United States, confirmed talks are intense, but added that both sides need to give and take. So for now, all eyes are on India and the July 9th deadline. Will the deal get done? We'll be watching very closely. Listen in to what the US President and Trade Secretary in the US had to say regarding the India-US trade deal.
Before we're going to have a deal with India, possibly. And that's going to be a different kind of a deal. It's going to be a deal where we're able to go in and compete. Right now, India doesn't accept anybody in. I think India is going to do that. And if they do that, we're going to have a deal for much less tariffs.
It looks like India is having their team stay longer in Washington till they say finish up this deal. What does the American side say?
American side says the same thing, that we are very close with India. And Brian, I will tell you that the career staffers on these deals are saying that they can't believe what we're getting. People who have been at Treasury, at Commerce, at USTR for 20 years are saying that these are deals like they've never seen before.
What Donald Trump has said, and he's repeatedly been extremely positive about the sentiment around this U.S.-India trade deal before July 9 as well. Not just the entire trade deal, but the interim trade deal that is being negotiated before July 9. Sort of opposing commentary coming in from the U.S. It's always been very positive in terms of what sort of on whether a deal could be reached. But from the Indian side, there seems to be a stalemate that has been reached because Indian negotiators are refusing to budge on key U.S. demands like access to agricultural sector and India's dairy sector, both of which are extremely sensitive. They tend to be very politically sensitive as well, given the fact that we are a very, very large agrarian economy, and a lot of small and medium farmers depend on those sectors for livelihood. So, for example, if American dairy enters India, they might be able to undercut the current prices that a lot of Indian farmers have set and the Indian government has set via its MSP program. So that is the number one sticking point. The other sticking point is that India wants further reassurance that there will be no additional duties once a deal is reached after after the first interim trade deal is reached under the bilateral trade agreement. That is the first, and that is another major point that there has to be as part of this interim trade deal.
Moving on, the foreign ministers of the US, India, Japan and Australia issued a joint statement condemning the 22nd April terrorist attack in Jammu and Kashmir's Pahalgam, which claimed the lives of 26 people. The Quad partners strongly denounced the act of violence and called for the perpetrators, the organizers and the financiers of the attack to be swiftly brought to justice. In fact, Dr. Jaishankar has said the victims and perpetrators of terrorism must never be equated, and India has every right to defend its people against terror strikes. He did not explicitly call out Pakistan. Listen in to Jaishankar's remarks, followed by Natasha Israni's report.
Quad is about deepening our convergence and expanding our common ground. I value our consultations on different dimensions of the Indo-Pacific in that regard. A lot is happening in the world, and I'm sure that our exchange of views will be very valuable for all of us. A word about terrorism in the light of our recent experience. The world must display zero tolerance. Victims and perpetrators must never be equated, and India has every right to defend its people against terrorism, and we will exercise that right. We expect our Quad partners to understand and appreciate that.
Well, yes, terrorism is something that India talks about often. This is not the first time. External Affairs Minister was at the United Nations just a day before yesterday in New York, also highlighting terrorism. So on broad terms, certainly the Quad has made noises supporting the overall stance of fighting against terrorism and standing up to it. But that doesn't seem to be the full focus of Quad during this meeting, which happened in DC. But I do want to underline that there are other challenges that the Quad is facing. Each of those countries, Japan, Australia, India, along with the United States, even though there was so much emphasis on Quad cooperation by the United States, especially at the beginning of the year in January, there have been some shadows after that, because the tariffs which Donald Trump has imposed have affected all of these countries. So there is some amount of bristling and friction there within the Quad, including Japan, which has been asked to increase its defense spending by the United States, and they're not so happy about doing that. So while overall front of cooperation as counterweight to China is important to Quad and remains in place, there are still a lot of mini fractures which have not been fully addressed.
Well, switching tracks from Ghana to Trinidad, Prime Minister Modi is set to connect with the Indian community globally, 5 nations, but one packed agenda. Let's begin with his touchdown in Ghana. The first bilateral visit by an Indian Prime Minister in 30 years will spotlight India's long-standing ties with one of Africa's oldest democracies. Prime Minister Modi will address the Parliament in Ghana and interact with the Indian community there, which numbers over 15,000. As far as his agenda in Trinidad is concerned, Prime Minister Modi's visit will be infused with cultural resonance as the country marks the 180th anniversary of Indian arrival. Believe it or not, nearly half of the country's population is of Indian origin, and both the President and Prime Minister trace their ancestry to India. Meanwhile, the visit to Argentina, the first in 57 years by an Indian Prime Minister, that comes at a time of sweeping economic reforms in the South American nation. So his talks with President Javier Milei will explore new areas of energy, mineral collaboration, including lithium, copper, shale oil, and gas. He's also going to be in Brazil. Prime Minister Modi will participate in the 17th BRICS Summit in Rio, themed around inclusive global governance. As the only leader to attend 4 BRICS summits in Brazil, his engagement will include discussions on artificial intelligence and climate finance, among other top priorities. Now, the final leg of the tour will take Prime Minister Modi to Namibia on the 9th of July, the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister in 27 years. The trip celebrates India's historic support for Namibia's freedom movement and also opens new pathways in areas like pharmaceuticals, UPI-based digital payments, critical minerals, and hydrocarbons. Meanwhile, at a time when Delhi is reaching out to leaders of the Global South and the BRICS grouping, Prime Minister Modi will be visiting these 5 nations in Africa and South America till the 9th of July. But the BRICS summit is being seen as the diplomatic centerpiece. During the summit, he will engage in discussions on key global issues, such as global governance reform, peace and security, strengthening multilateralism, responsible use of artificial intelligence, and financial cooperation. Prime Minister Modi is also expected to hold bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Brazil. And as India pushes to unite emerging economies, also expand its global footprint and deliver a firm message against terrorism, a declaration denouncing the Pahalgam terror attack is also on the table. Here's a report by Ridhima Kedia.
It's Prime Minister Modi's longest diplomatic trip. 5 countries, 8 days, and a packed strategic agenda. India is looking to boost cooperation on critical minerals, defense, digital infrastructure, and clean energy. But all eyes are on BRICS 2025. India's top diplomatic priority is to ensure terrorism is called out in clear terms. The BRICS declaration is set to strongly condemn the Pahalgam terror attack, where 26 people, mostly tourists, were killed in Jammu and Kashmir. India responded with Operation Sindoor, targeting terror infrastructure across the border. At BRICS, India's messaging will go beyond security. Major outcomes are expected to include a framework for climate finance, collaboration on artificial intelligence, and a new health initiative aimed at reducing disparities and improving outcomes. India will also push for trade settlements in national currencies, a quiet shift already underway across the global south. Even as Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russia's Vladimir Putin skip the summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be meeting Brazilian President Lula. Post-summit, Modi heads into bilateral meetings, particularly in Brazil, where defense and energy partnerships are on the menu. Brazil is eyeing India's Akash air defense systems and offshore patrol vessels, and discussions may extend to civil nuclear cooperation. The tour follows India's bold refusal to endorse a Shanghai Cooperation Organization joint statement that ignored the Pahalgam attack despite acknowledging incidents in Pakistan. That diplomatic brush-off set the tone for India's assertive stand at BRICS. For India, BRICS is about direction on terror, trade, technology, and trust among emerging powers. New Delhi is making sure its voice is heard and its red lines are respected. With Ridhima Kedia, Bureau Report, NDTV World.
Slipping into a quick break, back in a moment with the latest for you. Welcome back. The US Senate has narrowly passed Donald Trump's flagship One Big Beautiful Bill, which is a sweeping tax and spending proposal with Vice President J.D. Vance casting the tie-breaking vote. The legislation, which makes Trump-era tax cuts permanent while slashing welfare programs, now heads back to the House. But the bill faces stiff resistance from Democrats, fiscal conservatives, even Trump's ally Elon Musk. We'll get into the details in just a bit on that front. But Musk has been threatening to launch a new party over it. With the self-imposed July 4th deadline looming, Trump's signature agenda remains on shaky ground. Just listen in to the latest from Washington.
The bill was passed just this afternoon by the Republican-controlled United States Senate. They were able to pass the bill with Vice President J.D. Vance casting the tie-breaking vote. We know that there were a number of Republicans that had been holdouts. They've been holdouts on this bill. You mentioned that it was on shaky grounds. It was on shaky grounds in parts because it didn't have the votes until this afternoon. But yet and still, 47 Democrats voted against this bill. No surprise there. But Senators Rand Paul of Kentucky, Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina and Susan Collins, Senator Susan Collins of Maine, all Republicans voted no. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska was sort of the last holdout, the last hope that Democrats and opponents of the so-called beautiful bill had to keep this bill from passage. And because of carve-outs in the bill for the people of Alaska, that was enough to apparently persuade Senator Murkowski to cast a vote for the bill. And so now it heads to the U.S. House of Representatives, where Speaker Johnson is trying very hard to pass this bill by the self-imposed 4th of July holiday.
And now a quick update as far as the weather is concerned in England and Europe. The UK experienced its hottest day of the year as a heat wave, which has gripped much of England this week, reached its peak. Much of Europe, meanwhile, is facing hotter than usual temperatures with a high of 40 degrees Celsius recorded in Paris. More than 1,300 schools in France were partially closed. In Italy, 17 major cities out of a total of 27 were experiencing a heat wave, according to the country's health ministry. Spain, well, Madrid, Barcelona, Sevilla all recorded temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius. At the Prague Zoo, staff are currently distributing up to 10 metric tons of ice per day to keep animals cool, as temperatures in the Czech Republic also reach above 37 degrees Celsius. The UN Secretary General has said that extreme heat is no longer a rare event, it's become the new normal. But for a quick expert's view, let's go across to climate expert Zareen Osho, the director of the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development, IGST. Zareen, thanks so much for joining us. How severe is this current heat wave across Europe compared to previous years?
Well, thank you so much for having me here on the show today. The current heat waves that we are hearing about in the news are not necessarily less intense or more intense compared to the previous years. What the recent studies have found, especially this past study from University of Pennsylvania, the intensity of these are usually high and are constantly increasing in frequency. So the answer to your question is it sort of has plateaued out, but the frequencies have increased.
So what does the data suggest, Zareen? Is this heat wave directly linked to climate change?
So the current heat waves that we are seeing in Europe, and there are 3 countries that are battered by the heat waves in Europe, Spain, Italy, and south of France. These are the 3 countries that are experiencing these extreme heat events due to something called as a heat dome that has been formed over the continent of Europe. And the heat dome is being contributed to through hot air coming in from northern Africa and coming in from eastern US. And what is the heat dome? A heat dome is essentially entrapped hot air over land, something like putting a lid on a boiling pot of water. And this is created due to climate change. There are several things that attribute to creation of a heat dome. And the most important thing to understand is jet streams in circulation. So you have the ocean and you have the land surface area. The land temperatures increase much faster than water does. And due to that temperature gradients, there is a change in the circulation of wind that gets trapped over the land masses. So when you have that hot air being trapped over the land, it creates these heat stress events. And that then further impacts circulation of wind and as a result, circulation of global ocean waters. So cool waters don't actually get passed through the jet streams, which is why the heat gets concentrated. This is climate change, and there are many factors attributing it.
So much for explaining it to us. We'll, of course, keep in touch with you regarding the inclement weather patterns. Meanwhile, NASA astronaut Anil Menon has been assigned his first mission to the International Space Station, serving as a flight engineer and Expedition 75 crew member. Menon will launch aboard the Roscosmos Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft in June 2026, and during his expedition, Menon will conduct scientific investigations and tech demonstrations to help prepare humans for future space missions and benefit humanity.